Ladies and gentlemen, from Los Angeles, California, it's Doplex tonight.
Tabloid television, or as it's more commonly known, trash TV, was the lowest common denominator when it came to entertainment from the 80s all the way into the late 2000s. A medium for complete strangers to get in front of a camera and bear it all, or in most cases pretend to, with the audience participating or just attending the show to show their milkers and get their jerry beads for the 1 p.m. audience. Like topics ranging from deadbeat dad's semen tests.
Oh dude, great news, you're not the father.
Fear of olives. Sleeping with a midget stripper. And even transsexual surprises. You see, I just said 2 different things that could possibly get me castrated in 2021, but for the sake of transparency, that's just what these segments were called. Looking back on a lot of these shows, I realized that they seem to be the perfect encapsulation of the eras that they aired in, with certain topics being discussed and certain communities being made the butt of every joke. Things that would definitely never fly today were at the forefront of a lot of these spectacles, and oh boy, were they spectacles. So with all that out of the way, let's take a look at the era of trash TV, its rise in popularity in living rooms across the globe, controversies that took place as a result, and its eventual decline in popularity. But first,
I don't have anything else to say, I just want my jerry beads, thank you.
I am not an exhibitionist, I am a belly dancer.
Dear God, madam, get a job at Wendy's.
talk shows were nothing new, being a popular format since the 1950s, but they were all fairly standard. A pretty face sits behind a desk while inviting a guest to fake laugh at the camera for a few minutes while shoving rolls of Franklins up their anuses. In a family-friendly manner, of course.
Donahue show number 10267, Muhammad Ali.
However, in 1967, the landscape would change forever with a man by the name of Phil Donahue. After working at a radio station through the 60s, Donahue tried his hand at hosting his own talk show. What Phil Donahue did differently, along with discussing particularly taboo for the time topics, was he would let the audience interact with the guests as well, making it feel a little bit more personal. We see this a lot in shows like Springer, where a member of the audience will grab the mic and then stroke out mid-insult because they just weren't prepared for this kind of pressure.
Yeah, my question's for Kid Candle. When you're out, the macaroni and cheese, it doesn't look like you're lacking in it.
But in an age where ratings were the lifeblood of reptilian Hollywood hobgoblins and executive producers on a Coke and pancake binge, they were fiending for someone to push the envelope and garner those sweet retinas, much like YouTube today. Donahue's revolutionary format would pave the way for many household names, but this came at a cost. Those who followed his footsteps were willing to be more outrageous and over the top, which ultimately meant people weren't interested in watching old boy Donahue anymore.
If it's important to you, Mort's on it. Mort on politics.
The pablum puking Democrats. Let those dimple-ass legislators do whatever the hell they want.
Mort on the floor acting like a chicken.
So in comes Morton Downey Jr., a talk show host with a loud and belligerent attitude. He was widely considered one of the pioneers of the genre because he put the trash in trash TV. And that's because Morton did things different.
Acting like a chicken.
Instead of hiding behind a desk, he let the guests do the sitting while he commanded the stage and simultaneously chain smoked. This became his signature. He would typically have on guests who were against the norm in the late 80s, like a stripper for God or members of the Ku Klux Klan, to debate leaders and members of the African American community, which naturally had a lot of people side-eyeing the show. I'm curious what his goal for that one was. He would blow smoke in the faces of people who he disagreed with, humiliating and degrading them. And his shows typically got very loud and everyone, including the audience, would just get pissed off. Morton was no stranger to controversy, let me tell you. I mean, in an age before T-channels, many outbursts and points of contention really magnetized the eyeballs to him. People were focusing in on this dude. Controversy would become the lifeblood of his show, especially when he covered the Tawana Brawley story, a tale rife with sweet viewer bait. In short, a woman had alleged that local police officers kidnapped her. She also alleged that they covered her body with racial epithets and lathered her in feces. After a long trial and Morton using the story to fuel his ever-burning ratings fire, the jury concluded that it was all a fabrication and Morton would lose a lot of credibility for his coverage. This would actually lead to the downfall of the show, with Morton not only having a hard time finding guests who would be willing to be subjected to torture and embarrassment in front of a live studio audience, but also viewers just weren't that interested in what he had to say anymore. And so, in a desperate attempt to gain publicity, Morton concocted a plan to create his own controversy and take a page out of Tawana Brawley's book. In In April of 1989, Morton Downey claimed that he was attacked by a pack of rabid neo-Nazis who vandalized his clothing with swastikas and attempted to shave his head to make him part of the Assassin's Creed Brotherhood in an airport of all places. As a man who's very clearly not white, I might be speaking out of my element here, but I don't think that's how the recruitment process works. This would be proven to be false later, and old Rick and Morton had to file for bankruptcy because the show would be canceled soon thereafter. And his signature chain smoking ended up biting him in the ass later. He was diagnosed with lung cancer and would find new purpose as an anti-smoking ambassador before passing away in 2001 at the age of 68, despite him being staunchly against anti-smoking propaganda. So now that the masses have been introduced to such boisterous media, it wouldn't be so jarring for other faces to come in and try their hand at the same thing. From the late 80s into the early 90s, the daytime talk show roster was more than filled. You had plenty of class acts to choose from, all with two goals in mind. 1. Controversial topics being discussed to gain ratings at the expense of the poor schmucks who agreed to their fucking contract. And 2, being loud as fuck so that way people could stop scrolling through their channels to see what the hell's going on. This really sits in the DNA of trash TV. Loud, proud, and not allowed to watch because you see boobies. For starters, you had Geraldo Rivera. He was a charismatic magnet with a mustache reminiscent of Waluigi if he had money. People wanted to see more of him, even after a special where he opened Al Capone's vault to a disappointing nothing.
I promised all the critics that if we didn't find anything, I'd sing a song, so
Can I put my balls in your jaw?
I mean, people would see more of him in 2013 when he tweeted a tequila-induced thirst trap, but that's besides the point. But it is pretty funny. He was granted his own talk show where he gained popularity for discussing controversial topics with controversial guests. One notable event was when he had a segment called Teen Hate Mongers, in which he had the leader of a white Aryan resistance youth and Roy Innis, who is the chairman of the Congress of Racial Equality. And you're a smart person, I think you could piece together what happens next. And if not, well then,
racism is no more.
No, just kidding, it was an all-out fucking brawl. I hate this. That's right, an all-out brawl with one of the members performing their final smash, which was a chair being shot put across the stage, breaking Geraldo's nose. The episode made national headlines and made producers everywhere fucking hungry for their own racial brawls. Well, not racial brawls specifically, but something just as heated, more or less.
Mother's love runs unconditionally.
You just can't. You can't give up hope.
And then you had shows like Sally, which was essentially the early stink breath of a typical Dr. Phil episode, with preteens coming on the show to announce their pregnancy or to explain why they called their mom the bitch word.
I call her a bitch and I call her a hoe and stuff.
Many also forget that Oprah had her start as what you would call a tabloid television host, following very much the same formula as these other shows and only changing because of what we'll talk about later. But I don't want to talk about that yet. I'm a little hungry for some Springer, and you know Springer, the poster child of trash TV, the man who is solely responsible for keeping this damn train going for as long as it has. Some of you may not know this, but Jerry Springer actually started his career as a politician of all things, working closely with the Kennedys and even holding a seat on the Cincinnati City Council for 5 years. I mean, I guess being a politician and being in trash television, it's not a huge leap. They're kind of the same thing. Jerry Springer would get caught in a scandal in 1974 where he was outed for paying a prostitute for sex. I think that's the only thing on the menu, but you know. In 1982, after losing an election, he was approached by multiple TV executives to get his ass in primetime. Fast forward to 1991, the Jerry Springer Show would finally hit airwaves, but not as you may know it.
If you just joined us, we're talking about spoiling our kids rotten, yes.
When the Jerry Springer Show first aired, it was a very tame, political-centric show because they essentially wanted to make Jerry a Diet Phil Donahue, who I mentioned earlier in this video because they kind of looked alike. But the ratings proved that it just wasn't going to go anywhere, so they hired executive producer Richard Dominick to come in and flip the show upside down. And holy fuck did he do just that. The thing about Richard Dominick was that prior to working on the Springer Show, he was an actual tabloid producer. He worked for The Sun, which are those magazines you see at checkout when you're buying your Kit Kats and condoms. As I said before, the Jerry Springer Show is very tame at the start, with the exception of one incident where a couple of Jerry's guests got into a little cowgirl scuffle. People seem to latch onto this bit of WCW style broadcasting, so Richard Dominick knew exactly what direction he wanted to take the show in.
Because she was a girl, they let her off and put me in prison because she was the weaker sex. Now, if women want equal rights, they gotta do equal time. Okay, I cut her, I burned her. I drank her blood.
When the show re-premiered in 1992, it had an attitude like a Monster Energy-fueled preteen who just listened to a Weird Al parody for the first time, swearing and calling their mom
the bitch word.
However, it wasn't until 1994 that the show would really take shape into what we know today as The Jerry Springer Show. You had a guy who married a horse and tongue kisses it on stage.
Those panties, Pixel.
I'm gonna vomit.
Siamese twins singing country songs, and the most open-minded individual I've ever seen in my life.
Well, Brad, I have to tell you, I'm a man. I'll try anything once.
Good for them. You know, Jerry Springer was kind of like Mad Libs because you could just string a bunch of nonsensical words together and you'd come up with an episode. Let's give it a shot. Sexy. Nacho cheese. Inflatable pool. Dude who looks like he would work in an AutoZone. Yeah, that's a thing. I'm gonna carterize my eyelids shut later. Another element that was consistent with these shows was the Gotcha Gag. An unsuspecting victim would get their 15 minutes of fame in a way that they just didn't intend.
You need to know that I was born a man.
One such case would end fatally in 1995. The Jenny Jones Show. What started as a show hosted by a comedian who made popular for her women's comedy that men would be banned from. Oh come on, I know I have a penis, but I want to laugh. It would suffer low ratings, so they decided to push the envelope. On March 6 of 1995, a segment titled Same-Sex Secret Crushes would lift the curtain on these people, showing that they are just that, people, no matter how deranged. Scott Amador was a gay man who wanted to confess his crush to his associate, a straight man, Jonathan Schmitz. Schmitz had no idea that this was the case though. He was just told to come on the show because somebody has a crush on you. I'm not gonna say who it is, but it's maybe someone you know.
Get the headphones off of John and let's have John come out here and see who has the crush on him. Here's John.
The episode at face value seemed innocent and somewhat wholesome.
Did you think Donna had the crush on you?
Did I? No, we're good friends.
Well, guess what? It's Scott that has the crush on you.
You lied to me.
On the surface, it just seemed like good, wholesome fun at this man's expense, which of course is fucked up, but it's trash TV. It's commonplace. But it's what would happen next that is beyond that. After the taping, they went out drinking. It was rumored that they did end up having some sort of relations, but Schmitz would deny it. 3 days later, he found a note in his home from Amador that was suggestive in nature. Enraged and disrespected, he grabbed a shotgun, went to Amador's house, and shot him twice in the chest, killing him.
A 24-year-old man named Jonathan Schmitz was convicted of second-degree murder. But in the court of public opinion, it seemed like the Jenny Jones Show took the blame.
As a result, the ethics of tabloid talk shows would be questioned. Jenny Jones would be sued by the family of Scott Amador for causing this whole mess. This, however, would be later overturned since Jonathan Schmitz had a history of mental illness, so he was sentenced to a bunch of years behind bars, being released in 2017. Not surprising to anyone, the episode would never officially air. Ironic, because a year before Schmitz's release, Jerry Springer would do the same exact thing, which ended in a nice open mouth kiss.
Baby boo, you know I love you.
The murder would cause a rift in the tabloid cesspool. The hosts, who were so ballsy before realizing that the freak show they've been putting on was way too much of a liability and would take a step back from hosting these free-for-all voyeurist spectacles and switch up to a more tame show. Except for, of course, Jerry Springer. No, instead, Jerry took this as an opportunity to push the envelope even further since his competition was slowly fading away. He had the spot to himself. Well, sort of. We're all familiar with Maury Povich, you know, the daddy of Who's Your Daddy? The man who coined the term "you are not the father," followed by somebody running track and field to the back room to go dribble on the couch cushions, which I'm pretty sure is the only reason the couch was even there.
And one day I walked in on Michelle with another man in my bed. And that was around the time she got pregnant with Billy Joe. And Billy Joe looks like a combination of that man and her mother. She's in his fat like he was.
You are the father.
All the while, Jerry was absolutely destroying the trash TV market with crazier and crazier episodes, even getting blamed for the Columbine shooting for the explosive nature of the show. Pastors and boomer moms alike were so adamant that people fighting on TV over who held ownership of a peg leg were causing kids across the nation to be more violent. Jerry even went to court for this, but made a mockery of the courtroom to show how stupid their comparisons were. But that begs the question, were the episodes on Jerry Springer ever real? Well, yes and no. Pretty much the call-in process went a little something like this. Jane Doe really wants to be on TV, and they are willing to do anything to make that happen. And I mean anything. Springer puts out a call at the end of an episode saying, "If this is you, call us, please, we need idiots," with a ridiculous topic to discuss. Jane will call in and in some cases make up a ridiculous story about a love triangle she's part of. And apparently it was fairly easy to get approved for screen time. The story would then undergo a reality TV makeover just to make sure there are no dull moments and to make sure the fight quota quota was filled, and yes, there was a fight quota. I mean, it makes sense. It had to be loud, and weaves had to get pulled. The producers would gas up the guests in the back room, making them really angry and just fucking pissed off. Sometimes taking them out to dinner and getting them drunk, but not too drunk to where they don't show up the next day. Offering them the full package. I'm talking limos, a nice hotel to stay in, free dinner, that sort of thing. I scratch your ass, you scratch mine. And by my ass, I mean you go beat up this lady on stage and make her boobs fall out so that way we could sell more of these too hot for TV tapes. And once they were done, they'd send them home in a cab, never to be heard from again unless they did some sort of Where Are They Now episode. And then bada bing, bada boom, you have an episode of Jerry Springer that practically writes itself. Although, how long could people realistically watch this shit? As the years went on, it would prove that the tabloid-like nature of these shows are just starting to get stale. And this is where the pieces start to shift. Steve Wilkos, a security guard from Springer and ex-cop, would get his own spin-off slash show that would focus on more real issues while still maintaining the lifeblood of trash TV, with Steve being the loudest in the room and voicing his disgust for the people that he'd have on. I'm talking child
Sylvester's rapists,
wife beaters, you name it. I mean, Steve Wilkos would just like Hulk over them and strip them of their rights to sit down on his stage. He'd even like throw his own chair and be like, get off my stage. It was awesome, it was cool. And you also have shows like Dr. Phil still birthing skin tags of society and giving them a platform. But in the background, there was a new era of television a-brewing. Okay, so earlier I stated that the DNA of these shows was how loud they could possibly be. What if we took the DNA of that and injected it into the reality TV format that's starting to come up in the 2000s? Huh? What do you get then? Well, you get shows like Real World, So Real World, The Hills, Flavor of Love, Rock of Love, A Shot at Love with Tila Tequila, America's Next Top Model, Biggest Loser, Survivor, Jersey Shore, Wife Swap, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, Pretty Wild, Next, Room Raiders, The Simple Life, Paris Hilton's My New BFF, My Super Sweet 16, The Osbournes, Bang Bus, Kendra, Brittany and Kevin Chaotic, and Date My Mom. The new era of trash television proved to be more popular since not only did you get to turn your brain into soup, but you also had the reoccurring characters as well as character development. Granted, those characters were mid-2000s celebrities, but this was around the time that these celebrities were larger than life. A place to follow their every move sounds appetizing to those with an IQ lower than Bill Cosby's sentence and those who just love to hate watch. As I said earlier, trash television is very much a product of its time, forever cementing what we considered entertainment only but 2 decades ago. Naturally, with the progression of television and the death of cable subscriptions altogether and the come up of streaming services, there was really no place for these shows to even go anymore. So they were kind of doomed from the start. Sure, Maury and Dr. Phil are still doing their thing, but what of the king himself? Well, after his show was officially canceled in 2018, Jerry had plans to retire. You know, the thing about showbiz is when you're worth a lot of money to somebody, they're not gonna let you go.
My content revolves around dancing.
Can you guys show me a TikTok dance or whatever you got? Work. Yeah. Let go. Yeah. Let go. Yeah. Work. Yeah. Let go.
So Judge Jerry was born, a small claims court hosted by Jerry Springer himself. Much like the courtroom subgenre of trash TV, Jerry has litigants deliver their cases in an entertaining manner, with many of the episodes being broadcasted on YouTube. And that's really it. It's Jerry Springer in a courtroom. Nothing more, nothing less. That's literally it. And here we are, the end of an era. Much like Blockbuster and my will to keep going, it's slowly faded with time, but will forever be remembered as both the best and somehow the worst era of television in history. But I guess at least we have the reruns. Thanks for watching.